I never planned to sell hats. It was just flat out my head is cold. Like I have something called Raynaud's. It's not something that was on the list. In fact, I was planning to sell music, and that's how I got to this point. Because I know that creating something for business means that you have to do business, and in some weird way, that's kind of how Apex Renewal came about. It's like the idea that in the morning you see something new. And so I walked out the house. We had a family friend over, and we've been sharing our stories of struggle, right? And family friend is going over and leaves the house sometimes around probably like 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. or something. And the reason it stands out is because it was sunset. It was sunset, and I walked out the house, and I got to find a picture because I walk out the house, and it's a nightclub somewhere, and there's this beautiful sunset. It's pink sky and purple sky, and you're expecting the color to be different, or you're expecting it to look different. I don't know, but you walk out the house, and there's a house on the left and a house on the right, and you look right through the middle, and there's this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sunset. And it's the idea that as the sun sets, you do know that tomorrow comes. But tomorrow comes. And when tomorrow comes, you know, where are you going to be when tomorrow comes? And when you have that new chance tomorrow, what happens? And so it's the idea of knowing that at night, I mean, there's a couple things. So at night, you have this idea that nighttime is like the bad and daytime is the good, things in light, and that type of thing. But you also have the idea that at night, the moon rises to its apex. And in the morning, the sun rises to its apex. So you have these two things that are rising, opposing thoughts or opposing concepts, but these two things that are rising just to make sure that everything happens, whether it's night or day, everything happens. And you have this wonderful, in a way, juxtaposition of the concepts of night and day. There's this weird thing going on. I shouldn't say weird, but there's this thing going on where there's a self-growth happening, and we look at stuff like having gone through divorce and dealing with death of family members, and honestly the concept of aging. And in so many ways aging is death in its own, because you have to deal with the death of youth and the death of old ideas. And if you're approaching life in a way where you're trying to see and be aware of all the things going on, you realize that there's a death of self that is consistently happening. And so it was that weird thing of being in this place where I'm looking at the death of self. There are new portions of me. There are new elements of me. There are new places where I'm going. There are things that are evolving inside of me. And I might not have paid that much attention to them before. And I guess that's the beautiful thing with aging, is that you pay attention to a lot more things than you would have as a youth, you know? And so I'm looking around and I'm seeing this concept of newness and new self and new directions and new things. And sometimes those new things are additions to and pieces you get to add to what's going on. And then at other times, what's really happening is those new things are killing off your old things. And I guess in some way, that's kind of how I got here, because for the most part, I've known with myself that I've never been that person who was great at doing just one thing at a time. I liked the idea of doing a couple things, those couple things feeding the heart, the couple things feeding the mind, and the lessons learned in one place gets applied to the other. It's not a thought silo. You get to have a lesson here, it applies a lesson there. It's just kind of an amazing thing. And so when I started doing hats, it was because at that point I was doing music and I was focusing on my music being my income. And I had moved from music being something that was a hobby to something that was work. And if something's going to move from a hobby to work, then what's going to happen is I'm going to focus on how do I make sure that I'm marketing correctly? How do I package things correctly? How do I do all the things? How do I do all the things? And so I was looking and focusing on doing all the things in music, and I realized, and I knew, I was like, I need something that is just fun. Something that's fun for me. Something that allows me to not be focused on making money out of it. And I remember I went to a show. And one of my musician's girlfriends works at a store in Atlanta and was like, you could sell those. And I explicitly remember saying, I want a hobby I'm not trying to monetize. I just want something that's a hobby. You have that, and you have the person who stops me at Costco and says, hey, where can I get one of those? I love it. Can I get your email? I didn't even have an email. I didn't have business cards. I didn't have an email. I had none of that stuff. I remember somebody actually stopping me walking into Lowe's. And she was asking me about a hat. And this was about like years ago. It was a hat that I didn't even think was that good. Because there's that thing about perfection and trying to do everything as great as you can. And she stopped me and asked me about a hat then. And I didn't have a business card. I didn't have an email. I didn't have Instagram. I didn't have anything because, once again, I was just making the hats for myself. There are so many instances like that where 2 or 3 people just stopped me, while I was walking or while I was doing something, just stopped me and said, hey, where can I get one of those? Or where did you buy that? I love hats. And it's weird because it's kind of how I ended up here. People kept asking and people kept wondering, and then my wife looked at me one day and was like, you should try selling those. Maybe you should try. And that was after I held off for about 2 or 3 years. I fought it for about 2 or 3 years because I didn't want to. Get to have stages in life. The renewal is not about getting up and trying again. It's not about doing tomorrow better. It's not that. It's about the idea that with years and with days and with time, you just get to become either more of yourself or a different version of yourself. Time on earth might be short. I definitely agree with that sentiment. But I also believe the idea that days are long. You're doing stuff that you don't necessarily want to do. Go somewhere new. Do something new. Discover something different in yourself. Be different, because I don't know if it's a thing where you have to be. And so if you have things that don't align with you, even if you have things that align with you partially, you're like, I want more. I feel like you can search for it. Maybe if you're in a place of everything being great, maybe then you're just asking for more. But most of us just trying to make it and do the next step and make the next day. And so just having something a little bit different to reach out to, just having something a little bit different that might speak to our hearts a little bit more, I applaud that. If you have the urging to do that, go do that. Because if I had started this with the idea that I was just going to sell hats, I could use cheaper materials, and I spent about 2.5 years before I really got to the perfect blend of hat stiffener that I like. And if it was for the sake of just making money, I would get the cheapest materials, sell them at the highest price, and not worry about, or not put the stress on myself I do with trying to make sure that I'm doing it the best way possible. But you know, walking outside and seeing that sunset, it just gave me a different vision, you know? A lot of times, when we're paying attention, the earth, the universe, God speaks to us through all these things. In that day, that sunset spoke to me. And that's how we got Apex Renewal.